Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Stephanie Reed had learned early in life that appearances could be deceiving, and that control was often best exercised in silence. While the world celebrated the enigmatic billionaire owner of Reed Global Holdings, Stephanie lived quietly in a stylish yet understated apartment in the heart of the city. Few knew the true extent of her power. The company's public image was managed by a rotating committee of executives, while Stephanie oversaw operations from behind the scenes. That evening, at a prestigious investment gala, she wore a simple black dress, her dark hair swept elegantly to the side, and her presence seemed to melt into the background. As she observed the room, she took note of people's movements, their patterns of flattery, their eagerness to impress. Power, she had learned, revealed itself not in speech but in subtle gestures. Collins Williams entered the gala with a confident stride, the kind that demanded attention. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his smile was polished, and his charm was effortless. Yet Stephanie could see the cracks beneath the surface, the calculated gestures, the overcompensation in laughter, the hunger in his eyes for approval. When he accidentally bumped into her near the buffet table, his polished apology was almost mechanical, his eyes scanning for her reaction before he dismissed her as inconsequential. Stephanie allowed herself a faint smile. Few people had ever stirred such interest in her, and she already began contemplating the intricate dance that was about to unfold. Collins had always believed that charm and ambition were sufficient weapons to conquer the world. Yet Stephanie's quiet confidence unnerved him. She neither sought attention nor admired him for his flashy presence, and that very indifference intrigued him. For Collins, who had grown up in a middle-class household with a mother who constantly reminded him of his limitations and a father whose approval had always been conditional, recognition was everything. Stephanie, he realized in that fleeting moment, was someone who saw far beyond appearances, someone whose judgment was sharp enough to pierce through layers of pretense. That night, as he navigated conversations and tried to impress investors, he found his mind wandering back to her. He replayed their brief interaction, analyzing every glance and gesture. There was a subtle challenge in her demeanor, an unspoken assessment that made him feel both scrutinized and alive. Collins was ambitious and impatient, hungry for advancement, and here was a woman who seemed capable of controlling his professional fate without ever revealing her hand. He left the gala with an unexpected tension knotting his chest, a mixture of frustration, admiration, and curiosity. Unbeknownst to him, Stephanie had already decided to test him further, placing him in a situation where his ego and ambition would collide with her meticulously concealed influence. Back in her apartment, Stephanie reviewed Collins's profile in detail. She had acquired him through her anonymous recruitment initiative, presenting herself as a low-level manager for the company he had applied to. Her plan was simple yet precise: observe him, understand his motivations, and determine if he had the cunning to rise or the recklessness to fall. As she studied his work history, his education, and the subtle hints of personal insecurity, Stephanie's mind wandered to the implications of her experiment. She was not cruel, she was meticulous. Collins's charisma was undeniable, but it was his flaws, arrogance, impatience, a tendency to underestimate others, that fascinated her most. Placing him in her company, under the guise of a mentorship program, allowed her to study him without interference. Meanwhile, Collins returned to his modest apartment, thinking he had stumbled into the opportunity of a lifetime. He did not know that the person whose judgment he had unwittingly piqued that night held the keys to his career, a fact that would dramatically alter the trajectory of both their lives. Stephanie allowed herself a faint smile at the thought, knowing that soon, the first moves of a long and intricate game would begin, with stakes that neither of them fully understood. Stephanie carefully orchestrated Collins's first day at the company, appearing as his supervisor in a role designed to be unremarkable. She observed him as he navigated the complex office environment, watching how he treated assistants, colleagues, and clients. Collins, brimming with confidence, initially assumed he could charm his way through any challenge. He flattered the staff, exaggerated his expertise, and subtly undermined others to assert dominance. Stephanie observed silently, noting each micro-expression, every slip of ego, and the small moments when insecurity peeked through his polished exterior. There was a particular incident when he dismissed an experienced analyst's input during a meeting, only to find later that the analyst's suggestion had been instrumental in securing a key client. Stephanie allowed the consequences to play out naturally, resisting the urge to intervene. Watching him stumble, seeing the first real crack in his armor, gave her quiet satisfaction. She knew that humility and perception were lessons he had yet to learn. In parallel, Collins began to sense that there was more to the company, more to Stephanie, than met the eye. He could not identify the invisible forces shaping his assignments, yet a growing unease began to form. Something about her presence lingered, subtle and almost imperceptible, but impossible to ignore. Collins was beginning to understand that ambition alone might not be enough. Over the following weeks, Stephanie maintained her anonymity, interacting with Collins only through work assignments and indirect oversight. She observed his behavior, noting how he reacted to challenges, praise, and setbacks. Collins became increasingly aware of her subtle influence, even as he believed he was the one controlling his rise. His frustration mounted, but so did his admiration. She was a mirror to his ambition, a force he could neither ignore nor fully understand. Outside the office, he networked aggressively, attending social events and attempting to assert dominance in circles far beyond his experience. Yet Stephanie remained a ghost in the background, quietly testing his resilience, patience, and judgment. She introduced him to high-stakes projects, measured his responses, and allowed him to experience the rewards and setbacks that would reveal his true character. Collins's hunger for recognition began to clash with the ethical constraints subtly imposed by Stephanie's oversight, forcing him to make decisions that tested both his ambition and his morality. Every choice, every interaction, every minor victory or embarrassment was a step in the intricate dance that Stephanie had designed, a dance that would eventually lead to confrontation, revelation, and the unforgettable moment at the Valentine dinner. Collins quickly realized that the company was not as straightforward as it seemed. Projects arrived with tight deadlines, vague instructions, and high expectations that left him scrambling. His colleagues whispered about a hidden authority guiding the decisions, though no one could name her. Collins grew both frustrated and fascinated, sensing that someone was watching him, evaluating him. He began working late nights, often the last to leave the office, and yet he could not shake the feeling that he was playing into someone else's hands. Meanwhile, Stephanie observed from her private control room, analyzing his every decision, every interpersonal interaction. She took note of how he treated junior employees when unsupervised, the micro-expressions that betrayed his true nature, and the subtle moments of arrogance that could prove costly. Collins, despite all his confidence, started to feel the sting of his own misjudgment. He realized that ambition alone could not compensate for the strategic foresight required to navigate the world Stephanie had designed. Yet he remained unaware that the woman orchestrating the labyrinth was the same one who had first intrigued him at the gala. Stephanie allowed him to stumble forward, knowing that each mistake would teach him more than any praise ever could, and each small victory would inflate his ego in ways that would later make his humiliation all the more satisfying. In parallel, Collins's social life began to entwine dangerously with his professional one. At a charity art auction, he met Grace Jeremy, a stunning woman whose beauty and sophistication were matched only by her cunning and ambition. Grace quickly became a confidant, offering him advice on navigating elite circles while subtly feeding into his insecurities and need for validation. Collins, hungry for approval and captivated by Grace's allure, began sharing details about the company's inner workings, unaware that Grace had her own motives. Stephanie, from the shadows, noticed this dynamic immediately. Grace was talented and ambitious but reckless and opportunistic, the perfect foil to Collins's arrogance. Stephanie documented every interaction, every slip of trust, and every moment of vulnerability. She knew that Grace's presence would accelerate Collins's downfall and that the seeds of betrayal were already being sown. Collins, blinded by desire and ambition, could not see the game being played around him, that his future, his reputation, and ultimately his fortune were all being manipulated by a woman he thought he barely knew. Meanwhile, Stephanie began planting subtle challenges for Collins that would test his ego in unpredictable ways. She arranged for him to lead a high-profile client presentation, but quietly introduced complications that would force him to rely on his instincts rather than charm. Collins threw himself into preparation, confident that he could dazzle the clients with his personality, but during the presentation, technical errors and unforeseen questions exposed gaps in his knowledge. The clients, impressed by his persistence but unimpressed by his preparation, offered only lukewarm interest. Collins's frustration boiled over, leading him to lash out at junior colleagues, unaware that Stephanie had anticipated every reaction. She documented it all, smiling privately at his inability to grasp the bigger picture. It was becoming clear to her that Collins's arrogance, combined with his susceptibility to manipulation, made him a perfect subject for her long-term plan. Yet she maintained her anonymity, continuing to watch him stumble forward while planting the seeds that would eventually turn the tables in spectacular fashion. The stage for the eventual confrontation, a culmination of pride, ambition, and betrayal, was being set with meticulous precision. Amidst the growing tension at work, Stephanie took subtle steps to ensure that Collins's personal life would further entangle him. She arranged for him to encounter exclusive events and social gatherings that would heighten his sense of importance while testing his judgment. At a high-profile fashion gala, Collins attempted to impress influential investors and socialites, but Grace orchestrated situations where his overconfidence led to embarrassment. Stephanie observed discreetly, noting the patterns, measuring his response to humiliation and the lengths he would go to regain control. Collins, blinded by desire for recognition and by his infatuation with Grace, remained unaware that each setback was carefully engineered. Even when minor victories came his way, Stephanie calculated how those successes would inflate his ego, preparing him for the moment when he would least expect it. Collins's arrogance, ambition, and misjudgments were weaving a trap so intricate that he could not see it until the final threads were pulled. Every glance, every conversation, every strategic choice was being subtly influenced, a silent game of chess where only Stephanie knew the rules, the pieces, and the outcome. As Collins grew more entangled in his ambitions and manipulations, Stephanie introduced another key player, Marcus Ellington, a brilliant yet underestimated analyst in her company. Marcus was meticulous, observant, and quietly loyal to Stephanie, possessing a moral compass Collins lacked. Through casual assignments and collaborative projects, Marcus subtly influenced Collins, creating situations where his arrogance would clash with reality. Collins grew frustrated, seeing Marcus' presence as a minor obstacle, unaware that Marcus was an instrument of Stephanie's larger plan. Meanwhile, Stephanie continued to monitor everything, noting the way Collins interacted under pressure, how his decisions affected others, and how Grace's manipulations amplified his flaws. The interplay of ambition, ego, and deception was creating a volatile environment, perfectly suited for the dramatic confrontation that Stephanie had been preparing for over months. Collins was moving forward blindly, thinking he controlled his destiny, when in reality, every step was part of a carefully orchestrated sequence designed to teach him humility, and ultimately, to reveal his vulnerabilities in the most dramatic and public fashion possible. Collins's obsession with proving himself led him to a risky investment proposal, one that required both confidence and discretion. He presented his plan to an important board committee, exaggerating projections and omitting key risks. Stephanie, observing through discreet channels, allowed the meeting to unfold naturally, knowing that Collins's miscalculations would surface. During the discussion, Grace whispered advice designed to steer him into overconfidence, pushing him further into error. By the end of the presentation, Collins was both frustrated and exhilarated, convinced that he had impressed the committee, unaware that his success was superficial and temporary. Stephanie's careful observation revealed patterns of impulsiveness and over-reliance on external validation, traits she would later exploit during the Valentine dinner climax. She remained composed, calculating every reaction, while Collins remained blind to the invisible forces guiding his path. The layers of manipulation, ambition, and desire were converging, each subtle detail contributing to the dramatic revelation that would shake him to his core. Meanwhile, Collins's relationship with Grace deepened. She began subtly undermining his confidence while presenting herself as his supporter, orchestrating social encounters that highlighted his shortcomings and amplified his insecurities. Collins, eager for recognition and blinded by infatuation, failed to see Grace's duplicity. Stephanie observed quietly, documenting each interaction, noting the way Collins's ego inflated while his judgment deteriorated. Even as Collins basked in his perceived successes, Stephanie was laying the groundwork for a reversal so complete that it would leave him astonished and humiliated. The tension between personal desire, professional ambition, and subtle manipulation created a narrative that neither Collins nor Grace could control. Each character's motivations, flaws, and ambitions were interweaving in unpredictable ways, building suspense for the moment when all carefully placed threads would unravel in spectacular fashion. The story was reaching a crescendo, with every detail designed to heighten anticipation, suspense, and emotional impact. Simultaneously, Stephanie began mentoring Marcus to take on more visible roles, creating scenarios where Collins's arrogance would directly conflict with Marcus' competence. Every collaborative assignment, every strategic planning session, was carefully orchestrated to expose Collins's flaws while simultaneously elevating Marcus as a quiet, competent foil. Collins's inability to recognize Marcus' talent created subtle tensions that Stephanie observed with satisfaction. The patterns of jealousy, ambition, and ego were unfolding exactly as she had anticipated, and her silent control over the situation grew stronger with each passing day. She began contemplating the final sequences, the Valentine dinner confrontation, knowing that when the moment arrived, Collins's sense of superiority would make his public humiliation even more dramatic and complete. Grace's manipulations, Collins's hubris, and Marcus' quiet competence were all moving in alignment with Stephanie's plan. Each thread, subtle yet precise, contributed to the suspense and unpredictability that would soon climax. By the 10th segment of their intertwined journey, Collins had begun to show cracks under pressure. Small failures at the company, minor embarrassments at social events, and subtle betrayals orchestrated by Grace created a growing unease in him. His obsession with status and recognition left him blind to the growing tension around him. Stephanie, observing in silence, began to orchestrate the final moves of the game. Her knowledge of Collins's weaknesses, combined with the careful placement of Marcus and the manipulations of Grace, meant that every path Collins took now led to a scenario of increasing suspense. He remained oblivious, convinced of his control, while the story's intricate threads converged toward the Valentine dinner, the moment that would redefine power, wealth, and humiliation, leaving no room for error. Stephanie's quiet planning, her careful observation, and her ability to orchestrate events from the shadows had built a tension so precise that Collins could not yet see the trap closing around him. Every glance, every action, every small decision was part of a larger, suspense-filled plan, and the stage was set for the dramatic confrontation that would shock everyone involved. Collins's arrogance had reached a point where he believed he was untouchable. His minor successes, coupled with Grace's constant flattery, had inflated his ego to dangerous levels. He arranged an elaborate Valentine celebration at a high-end rooftop restaurant, imagining it would solidify his image as a loving husband and successful man. Stephanie, meanwhile, watched silently from the shadows, ensuring every element aligned with her plan. She had meticulously chosen the restaurant, the timing, the staff, and even subtle cues that would amplify Collins's sense of control. Marcus, acting under her guidance, subtly manipulated key aspects of the evening behind the scenes, ensuring that Collins's vulnerabilities would be exposed at precisely the right moment. Grace, unaware of Stephanie's true identity and agenda, continued her role as Collins's confidant, further fueling his confidence and sense of superiority. The stage was set, the audience unaware of the storm about to unfold. As the dinner commenced, Collins played the part of the perfect husband, holding Stephanie's hand and speaking words of love, all while planning the ultimate humiliation. He had convinced himself that serving her the divorce papers at the climax of the evening would destroy her, that he would emerge victorious, and that Grace would secure the remainder of his wealth. He had rehearsed the scene in his mind countless times, imagining her shocked expression, her tears, her inability to fight back. Yet Stephanie remained calm, her demeanor serene, her mind racing with contingency plans. She had anticipated this move from the start, predicting the exact moment, tone, and location he would choose for maximum effect. She smiled faintly, sipping her champagne as the waiter discreetly placed the divorce papers on the table, along with Collins's smugly triumphant grin. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with anticipation, as the final act of this intricate game began to unfold. Collins slid the papers across the table toward Stephanie, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "I suppose this is overdue," he said, voice smooth but charged with smug satisfaction. Grace's eyes sparkled with anticipation, ready to witness the humiliation she believed was inevitable. But Stephanie, calm and composed, picked up the papers, her smile widening ever so slightly. "How thoughtful," she said softly, her tone almost playful. Then, with precise timing and authority, she presented a termination notice from Reed Global Holdings, Collins's position, access, and any remaining company privileges revoked immediately. The room froze. Gasps echoed softly among the restaurant staff and nearby patrons who had been unaware of the underlying drama. Grace's face shifted from confident amusement to panic as she realized that the wealth she had hoped to control was no longer accessible. Collins stared, frozen, his carefully crafted plan shattered in an instant. Stephanie's calm, deliberate smile conveyed more than words ever could. The game had been hers from the beginning, every move anticipated, every reaction predicted, every downfall calculated to perfection. In the aftermath, the humiliation was public but controlled, orchestrated to expose Collins's hubris without causing chaos beyond the intended targets. Grace attempted to salvage the situation, but the termination letter, combined with Stephanie's strategic command of the company, ensured she had no leverage or access to funds. Collins's reputation, built on arrogance and superficial charm, crumbled as the realization of his manipulation and blind trust in Grace hit him fully. Stephanie remained composed, collecting herself gracefully amidst the shocked crowd. She had orchestrated a spectacle that revealed character, competence, and control, leaving no doubt about who truly held power. Meanwhile, Marcus, loyal and discreet, ensured all sensitive company matters were secured, further reinforcing Stephanie's mastery behind the scenes. Every subtle action leading up to this moment had been meticulously calculated, and now the final act had concluded, leaving Collins powerless and exposed. Even after the dramatic confrontation, Stephanie did not revel in cruelty. Her satisfaction came from precision and justice. She had endured humiliation, deceit, and betrayal at Collins's hands over the course of their marriage, yet she had maintained composure, control, and foresight. The Valentine dinner was the culmination of years of patience, observation, and careful planning. Collins, left shocked and stripped of both status and resources, faced the consequences of his arrogance and misplaced trust in Grace. Grace, meanwhile, vanished with nothing to show for her manipulations, realizing too late that the person she had underestimated was not only aware but always in control. Stephanie's calm authority, strategic brilliance, and unwavering composure had ensured that justice was served without compromising her own dignity or integrity. In the silence that followed the confrontation, the stakes of ambition, deception, and ego were fully revealed, leaving Collins with the bitter reality of his mistakes. Stephanie's life after the Valentine dinner returned to a sense of quiet normalcy, but with the satisfaction of control fully realized. She continued to oversee Reed Global Holdings with discreet authority, mentoring trusted allies like Marcus while keeping manipulative and opportunistic figures like Collins and Grace at bay. Her reputation remained untarnished, her strategy vindicated, and her vision for the company continued to flourish without disruption. Collins, humbled and financially constrained, was forced to confront his arrogance and misjudgments in solitude, reflecting on the consequences of deceit, ego, and misplaced trust. Grace, having lost both influence and wealth, disappeared from the social and corporate scene, a cautionary figure demonstrating the peril of underestimating Stephanie. The carefully orchestrated events of the Valentine dinner, while dramatic and public, reinforced Stephanie's principle that power, patience, and strategic foresight always outweighed impulsive ambition and deception. Even as months passed, the ripple effects of the evening continued to influence the corporate world. Stephanie's subtle orchestration had set an example, demonstrating how intelligence, patience, and foresight could outmaneuver arrogance and duplicity. Collins attempted to rebuild his life, learning hard lessons about humility, respect, and the perils of blind trust, though the experience had left an indelible mark on his psyche. Stephanie, meanwhile, continued to thrive, her carefully maintained anonymity allowing her to move freely while exercising full control over her empire. Marcus continued as a trusted ally, ensuring that Stephanie's strategies remained effective and that her vision for Reed Global Holdings continued without disruption. Grace's absence served as a silent reminder that opportunism without discernment was destined to fail, reinforcing the lessons learned by both Collins and the broader circle of observers who had witnessed the dramatic confrontation. Stephanie's triumph was not merely professional but deeply personal. The meticulous planning, patient observation, and strategic orchestration of events had allowed her to reclaim authority, dignity, and control over her life. The Valentine dinner, which Collins had intended as a public display of dominance, instead became a testament to Stephanie's intelligence, patience, and foresight. She had turned every manipulation, every deceit, and every act of betrayal into an opportunity to demonstrate her mastery over complex situations, her understanding of human nature, and her ability to act with precision and authority. For Collins, the experience became a defining moment of reckoning, highlighting the dangers of arrogance, impulsive ambition, and misplaced trust. For Stephanie, it reinforced the timeless truth that true power lies not in flamboyant displays but in patience, foresight, and strategic mastery. By the end of this intricate sequence of events, all players had been forced to confront their limitations and capabilities. Collins, humbled and reflective, had learned the hard consequences of overestimating charm and underestimating intelligence. Grace, thwarted and powerless, recognized the risks of manipulation and ambition when facing someone of Stephanie's caliber. Marcus, quietly competent, had been instrumental in ensuring the plan's success, highlighting the value of loyalty, intelligence, and subtle influence. Stephanie emerged not only unscathed but triumphant, demonstrating that foresight, patience, and careful planning could outmaneuver even the most arrogant and manipulative individuals. The Valentine dinner, while the climactic point of tension, symbolized the culmination of years of preparation, strategic observation, and careful orchestration. It was a vivid testament to the power of intelligence, patience, and unwavering control over both personal and professional domains. Finally, Stephanie reclaimed her life fully, embracing both her role as a corporate mastermind and as a woman who had endured betrayal yet emerged stronger. Collins, now a cautionary figure, faced the consequences of arrogance and recklessness, while Grace disappeared from influence, having overplayed her hand. The lessons of patience, observation, and strategic planning were fully realized, and Stephanie's empire continued to thrive under her subtle yet absolute control. The Valentine dinner, intended as an instrument of humiliation against her, had instead cemented her authority and exposed the folly of arrogance and manipulation. In the calm after the storm, Stephanie smiled with quiet satisfaction, knowing that every move, every observation, and every calculated step had led to a victory that was both absolute and irrevocable. The story, filled with suspense, emotion, and precise plotting, concluded with the triumph of intelligence, strategy, and patience over ego, deception, and impulsiveness. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.